Everyone thinks Mercedes just dominated the first two races of 2026. That's wrong. Because what they actually did in Australia and China shouldn't be possible this early in a brand new engine era. 2 races, 2 1-2 finishes, 0 engine failures, perfect energy deployment every single lap. And here's the part that's making teams panic. Their customer teams, with the exact same engine, are failing. Retirements, electrical issues, lack of data, no answers. So how is one team untouchable, while the others can't even finish a race? Max Verstappen noticed something. Something very specific. Not just speed. Not just dominance. But a pattern that looks dangerously close to something Formula One banned years ago. And if he's right, Mercedes didn't just build the best engine. They may have rebuilt party mode without anyone realizing it. Subscribe now, because what's hidden inside this engine could decide the entire season. Right after the lights went out in Australia, something felt off. Not dramatic. Not obvious. But different. Russell didn't just take the lead. He controlled the race like he already knew how it would unfold. No sudden drops in pace. No defensive panic. No energy-saving phases that looked desperate or improvised. Just smooth, calculated dominance. And then China made it impossible to ignore. Because this time, it wasn't just one driver. Antonelli wins. Russell second. Sprint race controlled as well. Different conditions. Different pressures. Same result. And that's where engineers start paying attention. Because in Formula One, repeating something once can be luck. Repeating it twice, with surgical precision, is a pattern. And patterns always come from something underneath. Something structural. Something designed. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. When you look at the onboard data, sector by sector, something stands out. Mercedes isn't just fast on the straights. They're fast at the end of the straights. That tiny detail changes everything. Because under the new regulations, most cars lose electrical deployment toward the end of long acceleration zones. You can see it. The speed plateaus. The gain disappears. The engine fades slightly before braking. That's normal. That's expected. Mercedes doesn't do that. They keep pulling. Meter after meter. Lap after lap. As if the energy never runs out. And if you're another team watching that, you don't think they're fast. You think, that shouldn't be happening. But this is where the story takes a turn most people didn't expect. Because the real clue didn't come from Mercedes. It came from what was happening behind them. Or more accurately, what wasn't happening. McLaren, a team expected to fight near the front, didn't even make it to the start in China. Both cars out. Same weekend. Same type of issue. And suddenly, the narrative splits in 2 completely different directions. On one side, a perfect machine that cannot fail. On the other, the same engine collapsing before the race begins. And that contradiction is too big to ignore. Because in Formula One, coincidence doesn't survive data. And data is starting to point somewhere very specific. Not to a broken engine, but to an engine that only works perfectly. If you know exactly how to use it. And that's the part nobody wants to admit. Because if that's true, then Mercedes doesn't just have the best power unit. They have something much more powerful. Understanding. Control. Precision that others simply don't have yet. But that still doesn't explain one thing. One key detail. The thing Verstappen reacted to. Because what he noticed wasn't just that Mercedes was faster. It was how they were delivering that speed. And that's where everything starts to connect. And this is where Verstappen's observation becomes impossible to ignore. Because drivers don't just feel speed. They feel behavior. They feel when a car is strong, and when a car is doing something unusual. And after China, Verstappen pointed at something very precise. Not the lap time. Not the straight line speed. But the way Mercedes was deploying energy deep into the straight, long after everyone else had already peaked. Now, to understand why this matters, you need to look at what changed in 2026. The new regulations shifted the balance. Less reliance on traditional combustion spikes. More dependence on electrical deployment. 50% of performance now comes from energy systems. That means one thing. You don't win by being the most powerful. You win by being the most consistent. By deciding exactly when to release energy, how long to hold it, and how quickly you can recover it again. Most teams are still figuring that out. They deploy aggressively, then they run out. They defend, then they become vulnerable. They attack, then they have nothing left. Mercedes doesn't have that problem. They deploy, and keep deploying. They defend, without sacrificing the next corner. They attack, without exposing themselves later. And that level of control doesn't come from raw engineering alone. It comes from something far more refined. software, mapping, tiny decisions happening hundreds of times per lap. And this is where the comparison starts to become dangerous. Because years ago, engines had something called party mode, a hidden layer of performance, used mostly in qualifying. Short bursts, maximum power, completely unsustainable, and completely dominant. It was banned, removed to make the sport fairer, more predictable, more controlled. But what if? What if Mercedes didn't bring it back as a mode? What if they rebuilt it as a system? Not a switch, not a button, but a continuous advantage, spread across the entire lap. Invisible, legal on paper, but devastating in execution. Because if you look closely at their data traces, there's no spike, no sudden jump, no obvious trigger, just a constant, extended push, as if the engine never reaches its limit. And that's what caught Verstappen's attention. Because drivers recognize patterns. And this one feels familiar, but evolved. And here's where things go even deeper. Because to achieve that kind of deployment, you need two things working perfectly together: energy harvesting and thermal stability. If your engine runs too hot, you lose performance. If your battery overheats, you lose deployment. If your systems aren't perfectly synchronized, everything falls apart. Most teams are still managing those compromises. Mercedes isn't. Their temperatures stay controlled. Their deployment stays stable. Their performance doesn't fade. And that suggests something very specific. They're not just managing energy better. They're operating in a window others haven't found yet, and possibly can't reach. Because finding that window isn't just about design. It's about understanding exactly where the limits are, and how far you can push them, without crossing the line. And this is where the suspicion grows. Because when one team lives comfortably inside that window, and everyone else is struggling just to survive near it, people start asking questions. Not public ones. Not yet. But inside engineering rooms. Inside data meetings. Inside conversations that don't get recorded. And all of them are pointing toward the same idea. Mercedes didn't just solve the new regulations. They decoded them. And if that's true, then what we're seeing right now isn't their peak. It's just the beginning. But there's still one piece missing. One detail that connects performance, reliability, and that strange consistency. Something hidden deeper inside the engine itself. Something rivals are already trying to expose. And when you see it, everything starts to make sense. And this is the part nobody inside the paddock wants to say out loud. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Everything points to one specific area. Not aerodynamics. Not suspension. Not even the battery alone. The combustion process itself. Now this might sound small. Almost irrelevant compared to everything else. But in this new era, it's not. Because while electrical power now carries half the performance, the combustion engine still defines how efficiently everything works together. And that's where the whispers begin. A possible compression behavior that changes under real conditions. Not in the garage, not during inspection, but on track, at temperature, under pressure. Because engines expand when they heat up, materials shift, clearances change. And if you understand exactly how that happens, you can design an engine that behaves one way when it's checked, and a completely different way when it's racing. That's the theory rivals are now discussing. Quietly, carefully. Because accusing without proof is dangerous. But ignoring it is even worse. According to multiple estimates inside the paddock, this could be giving Mercedes a small but critical gain. Not something obvious. Not something you see on a single straight. But something that compounds. Lap after lap. Corner after corner. Between 10 and 15 horsepower in real conditions. And here's why that matters more than it sounds. Because it's not just extra power. It's cleaner power. More efficient combustion. Better thermal behavior. Which means less stress on the system. Which means more stable energy deployment. And suddenly, everything connects. The consistency. The lack of overheating. The ability to keep pushing when others fade. It's not one advantage. It's a chain reaction. One improvement, unlocking another, and another, and another. And that's exactly why this is so hard to detect. Because there's no single moment where you say, that's illegal. Everything looks normal. Within limits. Within regulations. But together, it creates something no one else can match. And this is where the political tension starts rising. Ferrari is watching. Honda is watching. Audi is watching. Red Bull is definitely watching. And they're all asking the same question. Not, is it legal? But, should this be allowed? Because the FIA currently measures engines under static conditions. Controlled. Predictable. But racing isn't static. It's dynamic. hot, unstable. And if Mercedes found a way to optimize specifically for that environment, then they're operating in a space the rules don't fully cover. A gray area. And Formula One has a long history with gray areas. Some disappear quickly, others define entire eras. And this one feels like it could decide everything. Because if the FIA decides to intervene, if they change how engines are measured, if they force checks under real operating temperatures, Mercedes could lose that invisible edge overnight. But if they don't, then every other team has a problem. A very big one. Because catching up won't just require building a better engine. It will require understanding something Mercedes has already mastered. And that takes time. Time they may not have. Because championships are not won at the end of the season. They're built at the beginning. And right now, Mercedes isn't just ahead. They're operating on a different level of understanding. And that brings us to the final, uncomfortable realization. Because if this really is a legal interpretation, if this really is just smarter engineering, then what Verstappen exposed isn't a trick. It's a warning. A warning that the gap we're seeing is not going to close easily. And maybe, not at all. And now everything leads to the one question nobody inside Formula One can avoid anymore. If this is all legal, why does it feel so wrong? Because what Mercedes has built isn't just fast. It's untouchable in a very specific way. Not on one lap. Not in one sector. But across an entire race distance. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because dominance in Formula One usually has a weakness. Tire degradation. Fuel limits. Thermal drop-off. Something that forces the driver to manage. Something that creates opportunity. Mercedes doesn't seem to have that. They push early. They sustain mid-race. They finish strong. No visible compromise. And that kind of performance doesn't just win races. It controls championships. But here's where the story becomes even more uncomfortable. Because while everyone is focused on what Mercedes is doing, very few are asking why nobody else can replicate it. Not even close. Same regulations. Same limits. Same theoretical understanding. And yet, completely different results. That gap is not normal. And in Formula One, when something isn't normal, it usually means one of two things. Either one team made a breakthrough, or everyone else missed something critical. And right now, no one knows which one it is. But the reactions inside the paddock are starting to reveal the truth. Teams are no longer just developing upgrades. They're investigating, reanalyzing data, comparing traces, looking at things they ignored before. Because the fear isn't just losing races. The fear is falling behind in a way that can't be recovered within the regulation cycle.